אני מברך את כל הנוכחים והצטרף לפרי מבחינת לוח הזמנים לכבודו של חבר כנסת לפיד שנמצא פה איתנו, ואגיד עד 3 דברים. אני מאמין באיכות כדרך חיים ולא כסיסמה. Quality is a way of life and not just a phrase. אני מאמין במקום שבו אני נמצא, מכון התקנים, כמוביל האיכות הלאומי, the Standard Institution of Israel is a leading for quality in Israel and overseas. ואחרון, אני רוצה לומר לכם רבותיי, כיושב ראש ועדת האתיקה, שאיכות ואתיקה הולכים ביחד. אתיקה נבחנת בעיקר ברגעי משבר שבו אנחנו נתונים גם בחברה הישראלית וגם בעולם האיכות, ואין לי ספק שבאמצעות היושבים פה ואחרים נצליח להתגבר על המשברים האלה. And finally, I would like to express that quality and ethics goes together. They are both take and stand in a time of crisis, which is now in Israel and overseas. And I am sure that with the delegates here and together with our friends, we will overcome all our troubles. Thank you very much and enjoy the conference.
האיגוד מוענק למר מיכאל משקוביץ, מנהל איכות התפעול בחברת אל-אופ תעשיות אלקטרוניקה אופטיקה. במסגרת תפקידו בחיל חימוש הטביע את חותמו והשפיע רבות על קידום האיכות בחיל. בתקופת שירותו בצה"ל הוא הוביל את מהפכת האיכות בחיל החימוש שהיה חלוץ בחילות היבשה. מהפכה ששינתה את התרבות הארגונית ושימשה מודל לחילות החיילים בצה"ל. מר מושקוביץ מאמין ששיפור האיכות מוביל להתייעלות, שיפור תפוקות הארגון והורדת עלות הקיום. לאות הערכה ולהוקרה על תרומתו נמצא ראוי לתואר עמית האיגוד. מר מושקוביץ מוזמן לבמה.
I would like to take this opportunity to announce that the Israeli Society for Quality has decided to establish a program of scholarships starting this year to members who need assistance in financing their studies in the field of quality. We have 3 types of scholarships. The first one is for short courses and seminars lasting up to several days. The second one is for longer courses, which are several weeks or months in duration. And the third is for academic degrees. This year we have awarded scholarships to students who to 6 students who met the criteria of the program. The scholarships of this year are dedicated to our late colleague, Mr. Shalom Luz, who contributed much of his time and energy to promote quality and quality profession in Israel. The scholarships were donated by the Israel Society for Quality, the Luz family, and others. It is my honor to call upon the recipients of the scholarships to come forward and receive them. They are Yael Gilboa, please come forward. Avi Hayat,
וכל פעם שאני נתקעתי קצת וקצת לא היה לי קשה וכל מיני דברים, תמיד סרט של זה שמעודד אותי. אני רוצה להגיד לה תודה.
Gracias. יכול להיות לך זמן.
And now the time of politicians, Mr. Tony Lapid, the chairman of, I would say, Change Party, it's okay? Change Party? Change Party. The politician usually is supposed to know what will be, you're right, it's okay. The politician usually know what will be. Tommy, the nature of politician is to know or to say that you know what will be next day, next week, next month, next year, and when usually it will not happen, to explain why it's so. So, the podium is yours.
This was rather condescending, wasn't it? Good morning, everybody. Shalom. A long time ago, when I was invited to this meeting, we didn't know that there will have elections and the circumstances under which we will meet. And I think that when we talk about quality, perhaps the area in which we most need better quality is politics. But I didn't come here as a politician. It's enough for me that you vote for me. I came here as somebody who was for 40 years in the media, at least for the benefit of our foreign guests. I would just say that I was managing editor of Mari, which was one of the largest papers in the country, and I was Director General of the Israel Broadcasting Authority, and I was teaching journalism in the Tel Aviv University and wrote a book about journalism, so I think I know about media more than I know about politics. The main problem with the quality of the media is there's, as opposed to most other fields of endeavor, competition doesn't enhance the quality of communication. To the contrary, competition works against the quality of media. Because it is easy to understand that the more popular the things you are broadcasting or publishing or writing, the more readers or listeners or viewers you will have. And therefore, from the commercial point of view, it's much better to publish sensations, cheap things, entertainment, than to go into those serious subjects which enhance quality. And therefore, the most popular newspaper in Britain is neither The Guardian nor The Times, but the News of the World. And this is the main problem that we are facing when we talk about quality in communication. Nevertheless, communication in Israel is of very high quality. You may not agree with it, and we don't have the New York Times or the Washington Post or the BBC and the CNN and the CBS, but what we have in the circumstances in which we live, with the size of the country and the limited technical means, are the qualifications by which we count the quality of communication give us a pretty rosy picture of what's happening in Israel. We have a plurality of sources. We have very good news departments because we are unfortunately trained to have them. And we have very high ethical standards. There is no corruption in Israeli journalism. There are no paid journalists who write what they want. And perhaps the most important test is that in Israel, the journalists play a more important role in keeping the quality of public life bearable than the courts or the police. Public figures are less afraid of the courts and of the police than they are afraid of communication, media, journalists. Therefore, our press is having not only a very important task, but it is performing it very well. Of course, we all know that everybody will say, we know all the mistakes that they make, they are not accurate, they are rash. But I think that by the standards of any profession, Israeli journalists are doing a good qualitative job. Don't forget that in other professions, you hide your mistakes. The lawyers keep their mistakes in jails. The doctors keep their mistakes in graves. And the journalists publish their mistakes to the public every day. So their mistakes are much more visible than those of engineers or any other professions. And it is a more accurate science than most people believe. I remember that when we were in Ma'ariv, we once counted that we are receiving per day nearly 1 million words. So is Yediot Achronot. Now, if you check out the two newspapers, you will find that the front pages of the two papers are not only similar, there are nearly copies of each other. They are choosing the same news, the same headlines. Now you may think that they are copying each other, they are not. They are out of 1 million words, recognizing those 500 words which are most important. This is a very accurate measurement in profession. I challenge you that if anybody of you would sit as an editor of Ma'ariv or the night editor at a certain night to make up the next day's front page, and another one of here would sit at Yediot Achronot, you wouldn't have similar pages because you are not being trained in the science of communication. And the decisions made by journalists are as accurate as those of any other professionals, even if it seems to be a very freewheeling profession. The judgment by which we decide, and I'm speaking communication mostly about news, which are the backbone of communication. The judgment by which an editor decides what is the news and what is the thing that will be the headline is based on 4 factors. We can see it, I hope. I'm luckier than our composer. Yes. Now, these are the 4 factors. One is, and don't look now at the division because we have different photos to show you different divisions. One is the interest of the news item, whether it is really interesting for the reader or the listener or the viewer. The other, whether it is important. Not everything that is important is interesting, and not everything that is interesting is important. The third one is the truth. How sure are you about the truthfulness of the information which you have received and you are supposed to publish? And the fourth consideration is speed. All media are interested in being first, particularly the radio, which is really working on competition in minutes, and television and newspapers, which have an indulgence of a whole day. These 4 factors, if you have another diagram, can you show it? I have asked to show a few. Here what I wanted to show is they are not mutually exclusive. You may have one day a news item which is true, interesting, fast and important, and this torch will explode. But usually they are excluding each other, which means that if I need speed, I have less time to check the truth. If something is very important, it may not be so interesting for the readership. And if something is very interesting, it may not be important. If Pnina runs for the Knesset, it's interesting, and this part will grow, though it is not important. But if Mitzvah wins tonight the elections, it's very important, but it's not interesting. I am a little bit joking, but I am telling you very basic factors in considerations in a very important profession. We are not sitting in an editorial office and checking everything against these 4 criteria. But this is built into our system, and this is how it works. Now, if an atomic bomb is dropped somewhere, then they will not push each other out, but each one will be bigger and bigger, and together with the bomb, also this will explode. But these occasions are very rare. Usually these factors play against each other, and because they play against each other, you may find that truth is not always the ultimate criteria, because sometimes you must rush into the newsroom and you don't have enough time to check. And sometimes you will give up on the speed in order to make it sure that it is true. But it will be always these 4 considerations which will create the quality of the daily news. I don't know whether you ever gave thought to this, but this is how the system works. And because I was asked to speak only 15 to 20 minutes, and because my subject is simpler than modern music, I want you to be forgiving to mistakes the journalists make. Because most journalists are decently and honestly trying to give you what is interesting, what is true, what is important, and what is fast. And the real way to check whether in Israel you have free, honest, professional communication is one question. Do we know what is happening in our country? By this you can check the freedom and the freedom of communication and the quality of communication and the quality of politics, and if you wish, the quality of life in every country. Do you know? Can you trust that you do know what is happening in this country? I think I know a little more than most people because I'm sitting in a few committees, and I can tell you that we do know. It is not nice what we know and not very fortunate what we know, but we do know what is happening here, and therefore we can say that the quality of communication in this country is good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just I want to say maybe something not so important, but the truth. Pnina Rosenblum will be here at this Kenes at 3 o'clock in my session, so you will be able to ask her. Yeah. So, by the way, she's general manager of a very successful company, and this is truth. And now we are speaking about the last but very important, interesting thing. Dr. Mary Alexander from Mary's College, USA, will present the paradoxes of quality mass media, definitions and consequences. We are waiting for you. Thank you.
Good morning. First, let me say that it is no burden to come to Jerusalem. It is an honor, and thank you for inviting me. When I was first asked to speak at this conference, however, I thought there might be an error. I had no idea what a conference on quality might be, or what quality people might be. And I asked, were they sure they had the right number? I was immediately reassured by the person who called me, Dr. Berger, of your country, who explained to me that this was a conference concerned with all of the things that are in your brochure today. And she forwarded me a list of the kinds of people who are members of this organization and a list of the kinds of topics to be covered here. And I at first thought I wouldn't come, but I was intrigued by one particular topic. And it said, controversial issues. The mass media and equality, are they contradictory? I laughed. All right, I thought, these quality people have a sense of humor. Clearly they've seen Baywatch. Or perhaps they've encountered some of the Disney products like Lion King 2 or The Survivor. And I know that you've seen the supermarket tabloids with the tales of alien abductions, or worse yet, CNN. Yes, I have chuckled at the quality of mass media myself. But after a moment's reflection, I realized that I ought to be a little more fair to the makers of mass media products. And I realized that I ought to be more open-minded about what they do. Surely you have encountered quality media. You've encountered the writings of Yoram Kinyuk, or Tom Wolfe, or films like Life is Beautiful, or Welcome to the Dollhouse, or even television programs like Seinfeld or The Sopranos. Quality mass media are everywhere. But mass media, by their very nature, are incredibly visible and easily accessible. They invite us to continually evaluate the quality of their products. And this does not happen in the rest of the business world until there is a catastrophe. Most of the general public would not know how to evaluate a drug, or shoes, or a healthcare facility. We have preferences and we make purchases, but we assume that a series of invisible experts know what they're doing. And we only complain about quality when the shoes continually fall apart, or lots of people die, or there are massive layoffs. And even under those circumstances, we don't think we know what to do, we just know you did it wrong. But mass media products appear to require less technical expertise than running an investment firm. This is not true, of course. But the very fact that these products are usually produced in fairly accessible tone makes the audience feel like experts. In addition, mass media are often blamed for our social ills. It was the media that lost Vietnam for the United States. It was the media that hounded Clinton in office so he could be less effective. It is the media that is making us more violent or sex-crazed or even stupid. Yet, when it is convenient for us, the media are the heroes, bringing an end to an unjust war, undermining an immoral president, relieving our societal stresses through the catharsis of watching violence. In short, many evaluations of media are extremely biased and self-serving. So where does that leave us? If media evaluations are generally unfair, or at least unthoughtful, are there any ways to discuss quality? And do I, as a member of a decidedly, well, shall we say, subjective humanities tradition, have any hope of being fair in leading such a discussion? Well, I hope so. Despite our different worldviews, yours is one of measurement, I suspect, one of economics, and mine of art and aesthetics and social consequences, I think we have ways to discuss quality of media and I hope we can begin that discussion today. My talk today will be in two parts. The first part, I'd like to explain the importance of distinguishing between mass media, the biases embedded in a particular media, and the consequences of using a media inappropriately. And in the second part of my talk, I will propose some potential definitions of quality mass media and examine some of the paradoxes contained in those definitions. These are exploratory definitions, but I hope they'll be productive. So let's begin. A book is not a movie. A radio is not a television. Email is not a letter. A newspaper is not a magazine. And the internet is not a television. These basic statements may seem obvious to you when I say them, and yet we often attempt to use each of these media to do the job of another. Televisions often attempt to do the job of a book. Email messages often substitute for letters and conversations. Newspapers are reshaping themselves in ways that look like television newscasts. And as each medium does this, that is, as each medium attempts to define what it does well in terms of the qualities established by some other medium, it can only fail to meet those terms. Media are unique, with distinct properties and perhaps talents. To use a dance metaphor, you cannot ask a ballerina to tap dance. These are ideas that most of us know intuitively, and I know many of you have experienced reading books and then being terribly disappointed by the film version of them. But we often fail to remember the specifics of this problem. We dismiss the film industry, usually Hollywood, as incapable of conveying the quality that a book can convey. We suspect that they have ruined it on purpose and probably for financial gain. While this is often true, economics is not the only reason that the book does not do well as a film. Again, I say, a book is not a film. Books have ways of telling stories, and they encourage us to follow along in a linear fashion to conjure up images of characters and places involved. They also allow us to live in the minds of the characters. When we attempt to translate books into films, we lose that imagined and abstract world, and the internal motivations must become external actions. Consider, for example, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which allows us to feel the pain of a very articulate monster. It asks us to ponder the arrogance and intolerance of human beings because we can hear or read the thoughts of the monster. And we can imagine a monster without really seeing it. When we move to the film version, we might get some sense of intolerance and arrogance, but mostly what we see is a really creepy monster. Some film versions of Frankenstein have been interesting and well-crafted, but the concrete reality of the monster undermines the important psychological and philosophical turmoil explored by Shelley. However, when a filmmaker understands the distinction between the two forms, successful translations do occur. Now, you might consider Stephen King's The Shining, and I know he is not the writer of great art, but he is the master of the horror genre. The Shining is probably one of his best books, and it has plenty of truly terrifying scenes in it, as well as a sense of the inner struggles of the writer and a creeping sense of madness. The film The Shining is also very much about madness and horror, but Kubrick managed to keep our thoughts away from the special effects and on Jack's madness. One particularly good example of this was in Kubrick's transformation of King's moving topiary. A topiary is a sculptured garden of animals, and in the book, it eventually starts moving forward, rabbits, etc., moving forward. Kubrick translated this into a maze. A maze is a much better visual representation of madness. A maze is frightening. It is, in its essence, a scary idea to be trapped inside the walls of greenery, unable to find an escape. And the creators of special effects might have been able to create moving trees shaped like rabbits. In fact, they recently did so in a TV version of this that was just awful. But the rabbits detract from the ambiguity. A maze maintains the ambiguity, and you don't know if it's really happening or if the person is crazy. Instead, the madness remained real in Kubrick's film. But what is important to remember is that the book and the movie were not the same. Kubrick understood the rules of film, King understands the rules of the horror genre. And when filmmakers attempt to hold on to too much of the book, it is problematic. A film is not a book, and a book is not a film. A television is not a book or a newspaper. Like film, television is a concrete, visual, and action-based medium. Television does several things well. It is capable of wonderful, lighthearted programming and sometimes even more exhilarating programs that border on art. I'm a big fan of The Simpsons, for example, or The West Wing, very popular in my country. And I consider each of these shows good television. Television is also good at creating sympathy for the unfortunate because of its emphasis on one person's story, rather than on abstract social issues. Unfortunately, this kind of coverage is also dangerous because there is a high rate of emotional burnout. People care, but if they are bombarded with the sad images every day, there is a tendency to start to tune them out. In addition, as soon as the cameras move on to some other issue, people seem to forget the previous social problem existed. Finally, television can connect a nation in a moment of crisis. September 11th coverage in the United States was in many ways gratuitous and awful, but it also was cathartic, and in odd ways calming, because if television was on and we were home to see it, we were safe. These are television's strengths. Emergencies, emotional contact, and entertainment are what it does well. Increasingly, however, television is trying to take on the role of the book, and this is where the problem with television emerges. One place we see this happening is when television attempts to take on the role of the book or the newspaper, in particular in the area of education. When television attempts to educate, it intrudes on the territory of the book. Our educational institutions were based on the biases of print media. Books help to develop the idea of logical thinkers capable of critical thought and hopefully masters of some field of knowledge. And books emphasize depth and linear thinking. Television is completely incompetent in this area. What television defines as educational is about as complicated as Sesame Street, or for grown-ups, the Biography Channel. These programs offer cute puppets, silly encounters with alligators, and voyeuristic summaries of the personal tragedies of celebrities. Other experiments in educational programs have attempted to teach science or grammar or even civics lessons, and all of them seem to impart catchy theme songs and feature experiments which usually involve balloons for some reason. These programs are, I suppose, fun, but they are not harmless fun. Although it is nice to sing the letters of the alphabet or sing about how grammar works, this is merely a distraction from the larger educational message of television, which is, of course, that education is easy. Well, perhaps you think I'm being unfair. Children's educational program is quaint and certainly better, than Pokemon, for example. I would disagree on two counts. The first is that this does not stop at preschool, but continues on from preschool into things like Mr. Science, or the Discovery Channel, and for adults, the History Channel. And all of these allow us to see amusing and superficial versions of chemistry, ecology, and World War. These programs, driven by television's needs for fast-paced visuals, necessarily leave you feeling like you've done something educational without actually asking you to think. They've also used up the time you might have spent reading about a subject in a book that could have added some depth to the visuals. Now, again, you might argue that this is a problem of commercial television. What could be more in-depth than our public television 11-hour documentary of the Civil War? Well, certainly 11 hours is enough time for depth. Not particularly. In the first place, most books could still cover more material and complexity because sentence structures in television must remain relatively simple in order to be understood. And secondly, that documentary was some really bad television. Just because someone decided to pay for a production of 11 hours of the Civil War doesn't mean it's a good idea to film piles of photographs and air them on TV. This is as bad as those voiceover monologues of great books that they do in film versions of great literature like Emma or Shakespeare, for example. The translation from one media to another is not complete. Television is fast-paced and literal and generally fun to watch. Books are abstract and often slow-moving, especially when dealing with any topic in depth. And television as a newspaper is no better. Like education, television has a detrimental effect on news gathering and journalism more generally. Now, I take it as a given, by the way, that journalism is an important social institution. And as a citizen of a country that is, first of all, a democracy, and secondly, generally very committed to freedom of speech, I see journalism as a vital connection between citizens and their government. At its best, journalism can promote social change and encourage an informed citizenry. I feel the need to state all of this, of course, because the current state of journalism in my country is less than admirable and often ineffective. Although some of this might be blamed on the political environment or on the commercial nature of the programming, At least as much as to be blamed on television's appropriation of the role of the newspaper. Due to the visual bias of television, stories are not deemed newsworthy without pictures. Well, unfortunately, this means that coverage of dead bodies, or perhaps an occasional evil CEO, are newsworthy. The complicated processes of deregulation and corruption that led to the downfall of Enron was not. The Twin Towers and falling down was newsworthy. And the complicated series of political missteps that led to the chaos that was Afghanistan were barely so. Indeed, the coverage of political processes and economic policies are generally relegated to late-night shows that I and 5 of my friends watch, or to CNN. But CNN is another story. In addition to the visual bias of television, there is also a voracious appetite for novelty. Television is a 24-hour medium. And as I know you know, CNN is a 24-hour news channel. And nothing could be worse for thoughtful news gathering and reportage than a 24-hour news channel. In the first place, new things are not actually happening all day long. And secondly, even when they are, visual representations of news is not happening all day long. So what happens is, there's an unbearable repetition of the available pictures and unconscionable analysis of few events. I am, of course, talking about the horrible talk shows seen both on CNN and on Fox News in the US. Many people complain about the political biases of these news anchors doing these programs. They are politically biased, to be sure, and almost never toward my politics. But this is really beside the point. What is detrimental about these shows is the way in which they structure debate as a series of shouting matches rather than thoughtful discussion. Discussion is terrible television. These programs attempt to satisfy television's needs for action by shouting, and they attempt to satisfy the appetite for news by simply making things up. This is leading to a political culture of incivility and truly thoughtless and irresponsible approaches to thinking about social problems. And this becomes even a greater concern when our newspapers try to become television programs. They have reduced the space given to stories and have added more photographs and maps and charts to grab people's attention. And I know you've seen USA Today, but even the New York Times is becoming less substantive. Complexity is disappearing, which leaves the reader with little or no quality information. Print media are the home of complex thought, and great books detail intricate socio-political processes. Great reporting uncovers problems or explains connections between economic proposals and living standards. Not all books and newspapers do this, but print media encourages such complexity by the virtue of their abstract linear structures and the reader's ability to pause and reread difficult passages. Television is not a newspaper, and a newspaper should not be a television. In each of these examples of the misapplication of the medium, we can see that there are, in fact, media available to do quality reporting, educating, and storytelling. And in addition to those mentioned, we have radio, which is actually an interesting medium for both news and entertainment. We also have the emerging communication environment of the internet, which is difficult to properly assess at this point because it is still juggling between the television biases of images and the word version of itself. But I can say that it is no substitute for human contact. What all of this means then is that quality mass media are not contradictory as long as the media do what they do well. In order to achieve quality, we need to resist the impulse to have all media do all things. Greatness occurs when we exploit our talents, not when we deny them in favor of someone else's talents. Or to paraphrase an old saying, to thine own medium be true. Which leads me then to the second part of my paper. Given the biases of each medium, are there any universal definitions of quality mass media that are sufficiently abstract as to be applicable to all media? Perhaps. But let's begin with an obvious definition of quality, one that is particularly appropriate in the United States and business people everywhere. I am, of course, talking about defining quality mass media as profit-making mass media. Such a definition has obvious value. When mass media products make a profit, jobs are created, products are promoted, international commerce is supported, and so is international competition. Careers in the arts, as well as in fashion, journalism, advertising, and even sports are all supported by profit-making mass media. And this definition is at the heart of a capitalist society. Based on this definition, there really are no problems with our mass media. I would add, by the way, that according to such a model, the American dominance of mass media products such as film and television are appropriate. We win. Let the consumer decide, say we, and they choose us. But of course, there are many drawbacks as well. The first of which is that when we rely only on profits as a measure of quality, we are likely to encounter a lot of the same stuff. One of the overwhelming rules of profit seeking is that if it works once, do it again. Many who believe in free markets also believe that competition promotes innovation, and sometimes this does in fact happen, but more often we get mass-produced sameness. And this of course explains Scream 2, Lion King 2, Speed 2, Rambo 3, Rocky 5, and so on and so on and so on. We also see the effects of profit-making definition of quality in the prevalence of cheap productions that are currently the rage in the United States, such as The Survivor and most recently The Bachelor. Although these may not always get as large a market as they hope, they cost relatively little to produce, and so the profit margin is a good one. The fact that these shows have nothing to do with artistic excellence is problematic. The fact that they promote nasty, backbiting, and competitive views of the world is even more troubling. And this becomes even more evident in the prevalence of relatively inexpensive news magazines and general news programming, which is a product for profit in the United States. These programs favor dramatic and frightening tales suitable for television, and they all repeat the same story, leaving the viewer with a sense that the world is terrifying, unkind, untrustworthy, and unjust. When we combine the natural tendency of television to select dramatic conflict for its content with the profit-making imperative that guarantees huge numbers of such programs, we end up with what George Gertner calls the mean world syndrome. Or worse yet, we end up with the elections we just had in the United States. Profit-making as a standard of quality also inhibits the ability to produce programs of artistic merit, enriching or empowering. Mere entertainment does not qualify. What I mean to say is that although the highly formulaic films and television programs or books might divert us and keep us amused, they are not enriching experiences. A John Grisham novel might help us pass the time, especially on an airplane, and so might a number of other experiences such as romance novels, fashion magazines, and anything with Bruce Willis in it. But these things are not enriching media, they're just diversions. In order for any medium to become enriching, it must provoke thought, not merely numb the mind. It does not have to be high art, such as Picasso or Aida or Shakespeare or Truffaut. These are all lovely places to go when one's mind is ready to explore complexity and nuance. All of these would be considered quality media on the basis of their artistic merit. But not all minds are ready for such a sophisticated trip, and not all popular media are mind-numbing. So how might we recognize an enriching experience in popular mass media? Well, I would suggest, first of all, that enriching mass media experiences exist in those media products that encourage us to make connections with our own lives. This might be seen in a novel that has a central character so like ourselves that we see our own struggles in them. This can also be found in lots of films where people struggle in real ways with relationships or happiness or even evil. I don't mean in the superficial, predestined happy ending versions of the struggles. Those ring false and merely invite the viewer to passively watch what happens. Rather, we might look at more complicated versions of struggles, such as the struggles with drug addiction, presented in the film Trainspotting. Although the film is fictional, the complexities helped me to rethink the reasons for drug addiction and perhaps approaches to a cure. Enriching media also connect us with the human condition. This does not mean the evening news' voyeuristic glimpse of famine or poverty or war. These programs may provoke a sigh, but they rarely make us do anything like reconsider votes, or in the US, even purchases. But sometimes a story, fictional or true, can make us stop and ask ourselves what we believe and what we know. One enriching experience happened just by chance for me during the last Olympics. I rarely watch any of the Olympic coverage in the United States because it's horrible. They feature only the top 3 athletes, which is already an injustice. And then they tell the same story over and over again about how this athlete struggled and triumphed over some horrible thing in their lives. So I don't usually bother to watch the Olympics. But last winter I was flipping the channels and came upon the finals of the Women's Figure Skating Championship. I nearly kept flipping because everyone was in fact telling the story of Michelle Kwan as the underdog and how she triumphed over struggles and was there now for another chance at a gold medal. And I really couldn't stand it. But I stayed it for a minute because a young skater who no one really thought had a chance of winning a gold medal came up. I guess because they didn't think she was a contender, they didn't have the narrative prepared. Instead, they just talked about her skating, and there was a lot of silence. Well, Sarah Hughes skated the winning program. Very nice for her, of course, but that wasn't the thing that was wonderful. This is the usual underdog story, appropriate to the traditional narrative. What was wonderful was my ability to feel and see joy. Pure joy. Not greedy joy or cautious joy, like that exhibited by those skaters who were attempting to control their programs and win. Sarah Hughes exhibited surprise every time she landed her jumps. And she smiled so large, and it was so uncensored, that I cried. What I gained from that moment was a shared sense of her joy, but I also gained a sense of truth. And of course, that truth makes it clear how untrue most of what I experienced via mass media is. Mass media products often avoid the real in favor of a controlled and predictable version of truth. So for enrichment, I seek truth. I seek real life, real depth of experience, and unfettered emotion. Empowering media are much more difficult to find. Empowering media must move beyond just empathy or identification with a problem to a sense that one might be able to do something or act upon one's knowledge. This is the most difficult thing to achieve in a mass media environment. Indeed, it is the massness that makes us feel incapable of action. The size of the world, the number of problems, the sense of disconnection, the loss of human contact, all implied by the very existence of mass media, conspire to make us feel useless. And this is the greatest problem we face with our mass media experiences. And this is the quality most difficult to work for and identify. Mass media do connect us, but they leave us at home. How can we overcome this? How can we reconnect and share those enriching experiences and feel like we might be something more than just an audience, or do something more than just watch the world go by? Well, in this case, I have very few suggestions, and I fear that the biases of mass media may make empowering mass media experiences impossible. But for what it is worth, I'll mention the following examples of empowerment. The first actually occurred in the United States during World War II and happened via radio. During World War II, when Franklin Roosevelt gave his radio addresses, he included things for his listeners to do. Sometimes these things were as simple as ordering a map so they could fully understand what he was speaking about. When he did this, by the way, map sales went through the roof. This happened when he was explaining where battles were going on in Europe. He also instructed his audience as to how to help in the war effort and where they could go to volunteer. This was a necessity, of course, but also empowering. It brought people together in real spaces, not just conceptually via radio. The impact of this, by the way, can still be felt in our cultural memory of World War II and the sense of common purpose it brought. Empowerment also happened in the United States in the Vietnam area. Part of undermining the war in Vietnam came from mass media news coverage focusing on gatherings of people who were protesting the war. It wasn't just that they featured protests that made this empowering. It was the people that people could find the protesters, unite with them, and perhaps stage similar events. The coverage encouraged viewers to become participants because those people who were being viewed were not celebrities or particular political officials. They were often students, and the events were not expensive affairs. They required a location and a sign. Finally, we had a brief moment of empowerment during the coverage of September 11th. Most of the coverage was not empowering, and the current language of our news media and our politicians on the subject of war and terrorism is in fact numbing. But the outpouring of money, clothes, food, volunteers, and even blood were an empowering experience. People met in real life, saw real suffering, and gave each other real hope. All of these examples, of course, are of crises, and making people turn off their televisions or radios or computers, which is ultimately what must happen if we are to be empowered, is more difficult when things appear less urgent. One way it might happen is if mass media products include the potential for action in their stories. For example, news programs, if they must exist on television, might consider making connections to local neighborhoods by virtue of telling stories that are relevant to that neighborhood and resisting those stories that are merely visually stimulating with no connection with one's real life experience. Dramatic mass media products might also empower a viewer by showing him or her new ways to see themselves in society and suggesting how to fit themselves into the world in those new ways. It is more difficult to move from enriching to empowering in the fictional realm, but it can happen if there is some connection to the viewer's real life experience and if the narrative is truthful. But my suggestions for empowerment are dreams, of course. I fear that our mass media want something else. I fear that these small thoughts will be overrun with disconnection, and the benefits of disconnection that exist, that are real for markets and for politics as well. This disconnection to me is so difficult to fight that at times I do feel useless. And yet empowerment is such an important goal that I do hope you'll consider better ways to think about this and better definitions of my terms. I hope that you will develop all possible measures of enriching and empowering mass media so that many more examples of them might be imagined. Because to try not to achieve empowering mass media does not just impart trivial things or impact trivial things like art or the lack thereof. A lack of enriching and empowering media does not just lead to the lack of quality mass media. A lack of enriching and empowering mass media leads to a lack of quality lives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to mention that this what written here is Bruchim Abayim is welcome. You are very welcome and have a good conference. Thank you very much.